The wedding guests froze as the piercing sound of police sirens shattered the joyful music. Smiles vanished, children clung to their parents, and an elderly grandmother nearly dropped the basket of flower petals she had been carefully arranging. Across the quiet neighborhood park, a furious neighbor stood with folded arms, pointing toward the beautifully decorated ceremony and insisting that the gathering was suspicious, too loud, and didn't belong in the community. Several officers stepped out of their patrol cars while dozens of terrified guests watched in silence, fearing that the happiest day of two loving hearts was about to become the most humiliating moment of their lives. But before anyone could speak another word, the groom calmly walked away from the altar, reached into his suit jacket, removed a leather badge wallet, and the entire scene changed. Every officer immediately straightened their posture and saluted. The groom wasn't just another citizen. He was their newly appointed police chief. Before this unforgettable story continues, if you believe kindness is stronger than hate, forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, and hope can change lives, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing community that believes every heart deserves a second chance. The groom's name was Grant Mercer, a respected law enforcement officer whose reputation had spread across the entire county long before he became police chief. Calm under pressure, deeply compassionate, and known for treating every person with dignity regardless of race or income, Grant had spent 20 years earning trust instead of demanding it. His fiancée, Marissa Holloway, was a talented pediatric physical therapist whose warmth had transformed the lives of hundreds of children recovering from injuries. Together they represented everything their families believed love should be: patient, generous, humble, and fearless. Their wedding had been planned as a joyful daytime celebration inside a neighborhood botanical garden filled with colorful flowers, towering oak trees, and bright summer sunshine. Both families wanted the ceremony to remain simple instead of extravagant. Children laughed while chasing bubbles across the grass. Friends arranged handmade decorations. Elderly relatives smiled through tears as violin music drifted through the warm afternoon air. It was the kind of celebration that reminded everyone that happiness never needed luxury, yet not everyone shared that joy. Only a few houses away lived a retired property investor named Carlton Pierce. For years he had complained about nearly everyone who moved into the neighborhood. Birthday parties were too loud. Charity events attracted too many visitors. Community picnics blocked parking spaces. Deep inside, Carlton had allowed fear, bitterness, and prejudice to become the loudest voices in his life. When he noticed that many members of the wedding party were black families celebrating together with relatives of different backgrounds, ugly assumptions formed in his mind before he even walked outside. Instead of introducing himself or politely asking about the celebration, Carlton immediately called the police. He exaggerated everything. He claimed strangers had occupied public property illegally. He insisted people were creating disturbances. He even suggested there might be criminal activity simply because so many unfamiliar vehicles had arrived. The dispatcher followed procedure and sent officers to investigate. Meanwhile, the ceremony continued beautifully. Marissa walked beneath an arch covered with white roses while sunlight reflected across the nearby pond. Grant's eyes filled with tears before she even reached him. Every difficult moment they had survived together suddenly seemed worth it. Years earlier, Grant had nearly resigned from law enforcement after watching several officers abuse the public's trust. Instead of walking away, he promised himself he would become the kind of leader capable of changing the culture from within. Marissa stood beside him through exhausting overnight investigations, endless public criticism, and heartbreaking tragedies that most people never saw. She reminded him that integrity mattered most when nobody was watching. Their relationship became a symbol of resilience throughout the community. Then the patrol cars arrived, the music stopped almost instantly, guests exchanged frightened glances, some older relatives quietly worried that history was repeating itself, children sensed the tension without understanding why adults suddenly looked so afraid. Carlton stood confidently near the sidewalk believing the officers would immediately shut everything down. He expected gratitude for reporting what he viewed as suspicious activity. Instead, the first responding sergeant approached respectfully and politely asked who was responsible for organizing the event. Grant slowly stepped away from the altar. without anger, without embarrassment, without raising his voice, that he simply introduced himself. Then he opened his badge wallet. Recognition spread across every officer's face almost immediately. The county had announced Grant's promotion only 2 weeks earlier, although his official swearing-in ceremony was still scheduled for the following week. Every responding officer already knew exactly who stood before them. The atmosphere transformed within seconds. The officers apologized sincerely for interrupting the ceremony, explaining they were obligated to investigate every emergency call regardless of its accuracy. Grant smiled gently. He thanked them for doing their jobs. He reminded everyone watching that professionalism meant responding with respect even when accusations turned out to be false. His calm response surprised everyone. Especially Carlton. The elderly neighbor had expected outrage. Instead he witnessed extraordinary self-control. One young officer quietly inspected the permits for the park reservation and confirmed everything had been properly arranged weeks earlier. Noise levels were well within legal limits. Parking regulations had been followed carefully. There wasn't a single violation. Carlton's confidence disappeared. Neighbors who had watched from nearby porches slowly realized what had actually happened. Whispers spread throughout the street. Many people who barely knew Grant suddenly understood why the department had trusted him with its highest leadership position. Rather than demanding Carlton's arrest for filing a false complaint, Grant asked if he could speak privately with him. The guests expected confrontation. Instead, they watched compassion unfold. Grant walked with Carlton beneath a nearby maple tree while sunlight filtered through the leaves. He listened far longer than most people would have considered necessary. For the first time in years, someone allowed Carlton to speak without interruption. The bitter old man admitted that his wife had died several years earlier. Since then, loneliness had slowly turned into resentment. Every celebration reminded him of what he had lost. Every laughing family felt like another painful reminder that happiness had left his own home forever. None of that excused prejudice, none of it justified what he had done, but Grant recognized something deeper than anger. He saw grief hiding behind hate. He saw isolation disguising itself as suspicion. He saw a man who had forgotten how to belong. Grant quietly explained that his own family had experienced painful discrimination throughout generations. He described relatives who had been judged before anyone learned their names. He admitted there were moments when bitterness had almost captured his own heart after witnessing injustice during his career, but he also shared the lesson his grandfather repeated throughout childhood: bitterness could protect pride for a moment, forgiveness could protect the soul forever. Carlton lowered his eyes. For perhaps the first time in decades, shame replaced defensiveness. Without cameras, without speeches, without public humiliation, he apologized, not only to Grant.to Marissa.to both families.to the officers.to every guest whose joy he had nearly destroyed. Many guests cried quietly as they watched the elderly man struggle to express genuine regret. Grant accepted the apology, not because forgetting would be easy, but because healing always begins somewhere. The ceremony resumed. The violinists lifted their bows once again. Flower petals drifted through the gentle afternoon breeze. Children smiled again. The couple exchanged vows filled with promises of courage, patience, laughter, and unwavering faith in one another. When Grant and Marissa were finally pronounced husband and wife, applause echoed across the park louder than before because everyone understood they had witnessed far more than a wedding. They had witnessed grace. After the ceremony ended, something even more unexpected happened. Marissa quietly invited Carlton to join everyone for the reception lunch. Several guests looked surprised. A few privately questioned whether he deserved such kindness. Grant answered those concerns without saying a single word. He simply pulled out an empty chair beside his own table. Carlton hesitated for several long seconds before accepting. During lunch he listened to stories from Grant's relatives, laughed with children who knew nothing about the earlier conflict, and spoke with neighbors he had ignored for years. The walls around his heart began falling apart one conversation at a time. Months passed. Grant officially became police chief. One of his first community initiatives focused on bringing officers and residents together through neighborhood volunteer events rather than waiting until emergencies occurred. Carlton became one of the program's earliest volunteers. Many people initially questioned his sincerity. Grant never forced anyone to trust him immediately. Instead, he believed lasting change required consistent actions instead of dramatic promises. Carlton cleaned local Parks that he helped elderly neighbors repair, fences that he delivered groceries to families facing financial hardship. He publicly admitted that prejudice had blinded him and encouraged others never to repeat his mistakes. People slowly noticed that the angry man who once complained about every gathering now helped organize community celebrations himself. Years later, children growing up in the neighborhood barely remembered the frightening afternoon when police cars interrupted a wedding. What they remembered instead was seeing Police Chief Grant Mercer shaking hands with every resident regardless of background, while Carlton Pierce stood nearby serving lemonade during neighborhood festivals with a welcoming smile. Marissa often said their wedding gift had not been wrapped in ribbons or expensive boxes. It arrived disguised as the hardest test of their lives, because love proved strongest when challenged. Respect proved most meaningful when undeserved, and forgiveness proved most powerful when it carried a cost. Before we say goodbye, please leave a meaningful comment sharing one lesson you learned from this story or one way kindness has changed your own life. Your words may encourage someone who desperately needs hope today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May we all choose compassion over prejudice, understanding over fear, and forgiveness over bitterness, because the greatest victories are not won by proving someone wrong, they are won by giving people the opportunity to become better than they were yesterday.